recent study from Harvard revealed something startling. Nearly 80% of Americans admit that the biggest battles in their lives are the ones they cannot control: illness, broken relationships, financial struggles, or grief that time refuses to heal. Think about that for a moment. The strongest minds, the wealthiest hands, the brightest talents, all reaching a point where effort is no longer enough. And it's in that very place, where human strength collapses, that a deeper truth whispers: when you can't fix it, God can. A Harvard study revealed that no matter how advanced we become in medicine, technology, or wealth, human beings still hit a point where they cannot solve the deepest problems of life. It is a sobering truth. Our strength is not infinite. We may celebrate our intelligence and our achievements, but every human being encounters a wall that intellect cannot climb, money cannot buy through, and physical strength cannot shatter. This is not weakness. It is the design of life itself. Consider a person lying in a hospital bed. Doctors run every test, they apply every machine, and they push their science to the edge of knowledge. Yet at some point, they must step back, look into the eyes of the family, and admit, we have done all we can. That moment is the clearest reminder that there is a limit to human power. It is not only in hospitals. It is in the silent nights when a parent kneels by the bed of a teenager who is slipping into rebellion, and no lecture, no rule, no punishment, no reward seems to reach their heart. It is in the quiet despair of a man who has worked for 30 years, only to lose everything in a sudden economic collapse. It is in the heartbreak of a woman who has prayed for her marriage, tried counseling, poured out tears, and yet the relationship slips away like sand through her fingers. These are the moments where the myth of total human control collapses. We are taught from childhood that if you work hard enough, if you are disciplined enough, if you plan carefully enough, you can fix anything. The American dream rests on that promise. Work hard, climb the ladder, build a future. And yes, there is beauty in discipline, honor in responsibility, and reward in effort. But life eventually proves that not every storm bends to our effort. There are winds stronger than our sails. There are waves higher than our ships. There are battles we cannot fight with strategy or strength. This truth can feel terrifying at first. Fear rises when you realize you cannot control everything. For a teenager, it might be the fear of not knowing what to do with their life, despite grades and guidance counselors. For a middle-aged parent, it may be the fear of seeing their child make choices that tear the family apart. For an elderly person, it may be the fear of illness or death creeping closer. Fear whispers that if you cannot control it, then everything is lost. And that whisper has driven many into despair, anxiety, or even the collapse of faith. But here lies the hidden beauty. The very limit of human strength is the doorway to divine strength. If human beings were limitless, we would never search for God. If science and money could answer every question, our souls would never learn to kneel. The limit is not the end, it is the invitation. It is the whisper that says, now it is not your fight. Now it is not your burden. Lay it down. Let the one who created the stars and galaxies handle what your heart cannot. There is something powerful in recognizing limits. Psychology teaches that acknowledging what you cannot control reduces anxiety. Neuroscience shows that the brain calms when surrender occurs. Spiritually, this aligns perfectly with the words written long ago, "My strength is made perfect in weakness." Weakness is not a disgrace. It is the sacred space where God begins his masterpiece. Think about the child who cannot solve a puzzle. They twist the pieces, they force them, they grow frustrated. Tears rise, and then the parent kneels beside them, gently takes the puzzle in hand, and with wisdom rearranges the pieces. What was impossible for the child was simple for the parent. That is the image of us with God. We twist and push and weep, and the puzzle only grows more broken. But when we release it into his hands, the pieces click into place. In history, some of the greatest breakthroughs came not when people relied on their strength, but when they admitted their weakness. Abraham Lincoln, during the darkest nights of the Civil War, often told friends that he was driven to his knees because he had nowhere else to go. His human strength failed him. His counselors could not see the whole picture, but in prayer, he found guidance beyond himself. That guidance shaped a nation. Think about the world of medicine. Doctors can treat, but they cannot guarantee. Surgeons can operate, but they cannot promise recovery. Therapists can counsel, but they cannot force healing. They stand at the edge of mystery, and they know it. That edge is where faith walks in. Faith does not cancel science, it completes it. Faith does not mock medicine, it empowers it. Faith says, when your tools are done, God's hand is not. In the modern American life, we worship productivity. Our culture tells us that the busier you are, the more valuable you are. The more hours you work, the more worthy your life becomes. But what happens when the machine breaks? What happens when the body says no more? What happens when the mind collapses into burnout? Our culture has no answer for that except medication or distraction. But faith offers something deeper: rest. Not lazy rest, but divine rest, the kind that says, you are not God. You do not have to hold the world together. That is not your job. Think about how liberating that truth is. If a teenager knows they do not have to map out every detail of their future because God already holds tomorrow, anxiety begins to lift. If a parent realizes they are not the savior of their child, but only a guide, peace enters their heart. If an elder recognizes that death is not the end but a passage into God's eternal embrace, fear loosens its grip. The human limit is not a curse. It is the space where God's hand becomes visible. C.S. Lewis once wrote that God whispers to us in our pleasures, but shouts to us in our pain. Pain is God's megaphone to a deaf world. When you hit the wall of your strength, you hear that shout. You hear the call to trust what is higher than yourself. And though it feels terrifying, it is actually the moment of greatest freedom, because the weight you were never meant to carry is finally lifted. There is a strange strength that comes from admitting you cannot fix it. A man who admits he cannot fix his marriage suddenly becomes humble enough to listen, to pray, to let God soften his heart. A woman who admits she cannot fix her illness finds peace in letting go of bitterness and opening her soul to deeper love. A young person who admits they cannot fix their future discovers a courage to step forward anyway, knowing they are guided. The human story is filled with limits. Every empire that believed it was eternal eventually fell. Every genius who believed they could outthink time eventually died. Every athlete who believed their body was invincible eventually grew weak. But the story does not end there, because above the human story is the divine story. And that story says that when your kingdom crumbles, his kingdom stands. When your mind fails, his wisdom guides. When your body collapses, his spirit sustains. We live in a culture obsessed with control. Apps track our sleep, watches monitor our heart rate, spreadsheets manage our finances, schedules dictate our every move. And yet depression rises, anxiety climbs, loneliness spreads. Why? Because the soul was never meant to be controlled by data. The soul was meant to be held by God. You can track your heartbeat, but you cannot command it. You can manage your diet, but you cannot guarantee tomorrow. That gap between what you can control and what you cannot is the very place where faith becomes alive. Fear tells you that the gap is deadly. Fear says, if you cannot control it, disaster will strike. But faith says, if you cannot control it, God already has. Which voice you listen to determines your peace. And this is why so many people feel torn apart. They are listening to the wrong voice. Think of a mountain climber. He climbs with all his strength, step after step, until the mountain wall grows vertical and his strength fails. Hanging by a rope, his grip slipping, his heart pounding, he realizes he cannot pull himself higher. In that moment, another climber above throws down a rope, ties it firm, and pulls him up. Did his failure doom him? No, it was the very point that saved him, because he reached the end of his power and accepted another's. That is what divine strength looks like. The beauty of this truth is that it meets every age, every situation, every heart. A child learns that they do not have to solve every fear alone. A teenager learns that their mistakes are not the end of their story. A parent learns that their responsibility is real, but not ultimate. A senior learns that their final breath is not darkness, but a doorway. Across every season, the same truth holds. When you cannot fix it, God can. And that truth is not just religious comfort, it is scientific reality. Studies on prayer show measurable effects on stress, healing, and resilience. Neuroscientists prove that surrender activates calm centers in the brain. Psychologists reveal that those who practice faith recover faster from trauma. Faith is not wishful thinking. It is the most powerful alignment of human soul and divine strength. So the next time you hit the wall, remember, that wall is not your prison. Is your invitation. The invitation to lay down what you cannot fix and lift up your eyes to the one who can. The invitation to stop fighting battles you were never designed to win alone. The invitation to step out of fear and step into faith. Because strength is not found in pretending you can do it all. Strength is found in admitting you cannot and trusting the one who can. And that is where the human limit becomes the divine beginning. There's a quiet weight pressing on millions of shoulders every single day. It is not always visible, yet it is heavy enough to crush joy, distort peace, and exhaust the human spirit. It is the burden of control. People wake up with 1,000 worries running through their mind: finances, health, family, work, the future. By the time they rise from bed, their mind has already traveled to battles they cannot win in one morning, but they still carry them as though their personal strength can hold the universe together. In modern life, control has become a silent idol. From childhood, people are taught to manage outcomes. Parents say, "Study hard, and you will secure your future." Employers demand productivity schedules, numbers, and deadlines. Society glorifies planners, multitaskers, and high achievers. Every app on the phone is designed to give the illusion of control: budget trackers, calorie counters, sleep monitors, social media filters. The message is simple: if you just organize more, plan more, hustle more, then you can bend reality to your will. And yet the irony is that with all these tools of control, anxiety in America is an all-time high. People are working longer hours, sleeping fewer hours, and carrying more stress than ever before. If control truly brought peace, then this generation should be the most relaxed and joyful in history. But the truth is that this obsession with control has made people slaves to their own expectations. The teenager trying to control grades and friendships feels the pressure of perfection. A college student trying to control their career path is buried under fear of failure. A parent trying to control a rebellious child watches love turn into tension. A spouse trying to control every detail of marriage slowly strangles intimacy with demands. An elderly person trying to control their health is crushed by every new diagnosis and test result. Control promises safety, but it delivers chains. Psychologists often warn that control is linked to chronic anxiety. When the brain believes it must handle outcomes it cannot guarantee, the nervous system enters a constant state of fight or flight. Cortisol floods the body, raising blood pressure, weakening the immune system, and even damaging memory. People think they are protecting themselves by holding on tightly, but in reality, the tighter they hold, the more fragile they become. It is like clenching your fists around sand. The harder you squeeze, the more slips through your fingers. Spiritual wisdom has long understood what science is only confirming: control is an illusion. You can plant seeds, but you cannot force the rain. You can work hard, but you cannot command opportunity. You can raise children, but you cannot dictate their choices. You can take medicine, but you cannot guarantee healing. This realization frightens many because they have been taught that control is the only path to security. Yet it is the release of control that actually opens the door to peace. There is a story of a mother who prayed for her son every night. She tried everything to keep him safe: strict rules, careful advice, endless lectures. Still, he drifted toward poor choices, and her heart shattered. One night, exhausted, she fell to her knees and cried, "God, I can't do this anymore. He's yours." That night, she felt peace for the first time in years. The boy's journey was not instantly perfect, but her burden was lifted. By releasing control, she did not lose her son. She gained peace, and she discovered that God could work in places where her voice could not reach. American culture makes surrender sound weak. People are told to take control of your life, as if that is the highest form of strength. Yet if you look at history, some of the greatest transformations began with surrender. Alcoholics Anonymous is built on one central truth: we admitted we were powerless and turned our lives over to a higher power. That admission has rescued millions from addiction. It was not control that saved them, it was surrender. Control also damages relationships. When a husband or wife tries to control the other, love turns to fear. When a parent tries to script every step of their child's future, rebellion grows. When leaders try to micromanage every worker, creativity dies. Control suffocates because it is rooted in fear, not trust. Fear says, if I don't manage every detail, disaster will happen. Trust says, even if I don't control everything, life will not collapse because there is a greater hand holding the story. There's an image often used in therapy. Imagine holding a rope in a tug-of-war against a giant. The harder you pull, the more exhausted you become, and you will never win. The therapist says, drop the rope. It sounds too simple, but it changes everything. Dropping the rope does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop fighting battles you cannot win. That is what surrender looks like. It is the release of what was never in your power to control in the first place. Science confirms this principle. When people practice letting go, through prayer, meditation, or faith, their stress levels decrease. Studies show that people who surrender to God in prayer experience lower anxiety, faster recovery from illness, and greater resilience after trauma. Their bodies literally heal faster because their souls stop carrying unnecessary weight. The brain rewires when it believes it is not alone, when it believes that an infinite God is working behind the curtain of life. Think about driving. You grip the wheel, your eyes on the road, every muscle tense. If you hold too tightly, you cannot even steer smoothly. But when you relax your grip, you still guide the car, but the journey feels bearable. Life is similar. You are meant to guide, not to control every stone and turn. God is the one who holds the roads you cannot see. This truth brings freedom across generations. A teenager realizes that failing a test does not mean their future is ruined because their value is not tied to grades. A young adult realizes they do not need to manipulate relationships to secure love because real love comes from trust. A parent learns to release guilt and surrender a child to God's care. An older person facing illness learns that letting go of fear allows them to live their final years with dignity and peace. Control also kills joy. When every moment is managed, nothing is experienced. Families go on vacations, but parents are so busy planning every detail that they miss the laughter of their children on the beach. Couples plan weddings with such rigid control that they forget to enjoy the love that brought them there. Workers control their career paths so tightly that they miss unexpected opportunities knocking at their door. Life becomes a checklist instead of a gift. And when control fails, as it always does, bitterness replaces joy. Releasing control is not irresponsibility. It does not mean quitting your job, ignoring your health, or abandoning your duties. It means doing your part with faith and leaving the rest to God. A farmer tills the soil, plants the seed, and waters it, but he cannot command the sun or the rain. If he obsesses about controlling the weather, he will collapse under anxiety. If he accepts his limits and trusts the natural order, he will find peace while the harvest grows. This principle is echoed in the Bible. Cast your cares on him, for he cares for you. It is echoed in psychology. Let go of what you cannot control. It is echoed in science. Stress decreases when surrender increases. It is echoed in wisdom traditions around the world. Humanity has always known that control is a burden too heavy for one's soul to carry. There is a deep motivation in knowing that you do not have to fix everything. That truth breathes life back into weary hearts. The student can study without carrying the crushing fear of failure. The worker can give their best without being enslaved to perfection. The parent can love deeply without collapsing under guilt when children stumble. The elder can rest without fearing tomorrow. When people surrender, they gain the freedom to live fully in the present moment. And here is the greatest irony. When you release control, you often see greater results than when you cling tightly. Parents who release control raise children who learn independence. Leaders who trust their teams inspire creativity. Couples who release control experience deeper love. Faith that releases control opens the door for miracles. By letting go, you actually allow life to breathe again. The burden of control is heavy because it was never meant to be carried alone. Human shoulders were designed to lift responsibility, not omnipotence. Responsibility means doing your part, studying, working, loving, giving. Omnipotence means carrying the entire outcome of the universe. When people confuse the two, they collapse. God never asked you to carry what only He can hold. And so, the call is simple yet profound. Release the grip. Drop the rope. Lay down the burden. Trust the one who holds what you cannot. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. This is not defeat. This is freedom. The human spirit is not meant to live in chains of control, but in the lightness of faith. When you let go, you do not lose. You find peace, you find strength, and you find God working in ways you could never imagine. There is a strange paradox about human beings. We are strongest not when we tighten our grip, but when we learn to release it. Every part of life seems to teach the opposite. From the time we are children, we are told to fight harder, hold tighter, never let go, and never quit. Yet if you watch the natural world, you see a different wisdom at play. A tree does not resist the wind. It bends and survives the storm. Water does not force its way through rock. It flows patiently until the rock gives way. Muscles do not grow by constant contraction. They grow when they release and rest. Nature seems to be whispering something science now confirms. Surrender is not weakness, is wisdom written into the design of life itself. The brain is a fascinating organ. Neuroscientists have studied what happens when people refuse to let go of control. Their brains remain in a heightened state of stress response, with cortisol flooding the body, blood vessels tightening, and the immune system weakening. People who live this way are more prone to anxiety, insomnia, high blood pressure, even heart disease. The refusal to surrender is not only a spiritual weight, it is a physical poison. Yet something remarkable happens when surrender enters the picture. In studies on prayer and meditation, scientists observe that the brain waves shift into slower, calmer rhythms. Cortisol levels drop, the immune system strengthens, sleep improves, blood pressure lowers. It's almost as if the body itself is designed to reward surrender. There is a story of a soldier who returned from war with deep trauma. He had nightmares, constant fear, and an overwhelming need to control his environment. He locked every door, checked windows multiple times, and lived in a state of unending vigilance. Therapy helped him see that his hypercontrol was a way of holding back memories, a way of saying, "I will never let myself be hurt again." But that control was destroying him. When he learned to release, when he learned to trust that he was no longer in danger, his brain began to heal. Science calls it neural rewiring. Faith calls it surrender. Different languages, but the same truth. Psychology offers another perspective. Therapists speak of radical acceptance, the practice of acknowledging reality without trying to fight it into submission. When people accept what they cannot change, their mental health improves dramatically. They stop wasting energy on battles that cannot be won, and they redirect their energy toward living. Faith has always spoken the same wisdom: surrender your will, and you will find peace. When Jesus prayed in Gethsemane, "Not my will, but yours," he embodied the ultimate surrender. And in that surrender came the greatest victory. Science and faith converge on this point. The human spirit flourishes when it stops pretending to be God. Think of the human hand. When it clenches in a fist, it is prepared to fight, but it cannot receive anything. When it opens, it looks vulnerable, but is able to hold gifts. Life works the same way. A clenched soul may feel strong, but it is closed to peace, love, and joy. An open soul may feel vulnerable, but it is positioned to receive blessings it could never create by force. That openness is the very definition of surrender. Some people resist this idea because they confuse surrender with defeat. They think letting go means giving up, or that surrender means passivity. But surrender is not quitting. Surrender is alignment. When a broken bone is placed in a cast, the person is not quitting healing. They are aligning with the body's natural design. When a singer breathes correctly, they are not giving up control of their voice. They are aligning with how the lungs and diaphragm were created to function. In the same way, surrender is not abandoning life, it is aligning with the design of life itself. One of the most striking things about surrender is that it often leads to breakthroughs that force never could. Business leaders who have faced collapse often admit that their turning point came not when they doubled their effort, but when they admitted they could not carry it alone. Parents speak of the moment they stopped trying to force their children into a mold and instead prayed and trusted. In those moments, hearts softened, relationships healed, doors opened. The act of letting go created space for transformation. Science would say surrender activates new parts of the brain, unlocking creativity and resilience. Faith would say surrender invites God to move where human strength could not. Both are true. Think about stress. When someone is caught in constant control, their thoughts spin endlessly. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if tomorrow collapses? That mental loop is exhausting. But when they say, "I cannot control tomorrow, but I can trust that tomorrow is held by God," their mind stops spinning. Neuroscience shows that trust and surrender reduce activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and increase activity in the prefrontal cortex, the center of reasoning and calm. The brain itself responds positively to faith. This is not fantasy, this is measurable truth. Stories throughout history reflect this pattern. Pilots during World War II who survived near-death missions often said they found peace only when they accepted that their lives were in God's hands. Survivors of natural disasters often testify that the moment they released their panic and trusted, they made wiser choices and found the strength to endure. In modern hospitals, chaplains notice that patients who surrender their fear to God often recover faster or face death with greater dignity and calm. Something profound happens when the human spirit releases its desperate need to control outcomes it was never designed to hold. There is a beautiful paradox about surrender. The world says, if you let go, you will lose everything. Yet in reality, it is when you let go that you discover freedom. A student who obsesses over grades is suffocated by anxiety, but when they release the need to be perfect, they actually learn better. A worker who clings to control at the office burns out, but when they let go and trust the process, creativity flows again. A person who fears losing a relationship suffocates love, but when they release control, intimacy deepens. Surrender feels like loss, but it often brings gain. This truth stretches across generations. A teenager learns to surrender peer pressure and discovers confidence. A parent surrenders their constant worry and finds joy in parenting again. An elder surrenders the fear of death and discovers peace in the face of eternity. Surrender is not tied to age, it is tied to the human condition. We all reach a point where holding on is breaking us, and releasing is the only path to healing. One powerful example comes from health. Studies on patients with chronic pain reveal that those who surrender their fight against pain often live with greater quality of life than those who constantly resist. This does not mean they love the pain, but they accept its presence and stop wasting their soul in hatred of it. Acceptance frees them to focus on what they can still enjoy, and this mental shift reduces their actual experience of suffering. Faith speaks the same wisdom. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. When people accept their weakness and surrender to God, they find that strength rises in unexpected ways. The science of surrender teaches us that peace is not found in the absence of problems, but in the release of control. People can be in the same storm, yet one drowns in anxiety while another rests in trust. The difference is not the size of the storm, but the posture of the soul. The one who surrenders stops fighting the ocean and lets God carry them through. The one who resists wastes all their energy thrashing and sinks faster. Every culture has stories of surrender. Native traditions speak of giving struggles to the Great Spirit. Eastern philosophies teach the art of letting go. Christian faith points to a Savior who surrendered his will to the Father. Across languages, the wisdom is the same. Life is too vast for human control, but it is not too vast for divine hands. The sooner the soul accepts this, the lighter life becomes. So what does this mean for daily living? It means when stress rises at work, you pause, breathe, and remember that your worth is not tied to outcomes. It means when fear rises in parenting, you pray and release your child into God's care, doing your part, but not carrying what only God can. It means when sickness shakes your body, you fight with medicine and effort, but you also rest knowing that your story is held by the author of life. It means when the future terrifies you, you release the illusion of control and step forward in faith. The science of surrender is really the science of living in harmony with reality. Reality says you are not infinite. Reality says you cannot guarantee tomorrow. Reality says you are fragile. Faith does not deny that. Faith embraces it and adds the truth that where you end, God begins. And in that meeting point, the human soul finds the greatest strength it could ever know. Surrender is not about losing power. It is about channeling power. When you stop wasting energy on what you cannot control, you suddenly find energy for what you can control. Loving, creating, growing, serving. When you let go of anxiety about tomorrow, you suddenly find strength for today. When you stop obsessing over outcomes, you suddenly find joy in the process. That is the miracle of surrender. And so, the science of surrender is not just scientific, not just spiritual, it is deeply human. It speaks to the teenager drowning in stress, the adult buried in responsibilities, the elder staring at mortality. It says, you were never meant to carry it all. Release it. Trust. Open your hands. Let peace enter. For when you surrender, you are not emptying your life of meaning. You are making space for the one who can carry what you cannot. Fear has a strange way of disguising itself as wisdom. It creeps in when the path ahead is unclear, whispering that the unknown is too dangerous to step into. A teenager sitting with college applications feels it when every decision seems like the weight of their entire future. An adult working 2 jobs feels it when they look at a stack of bills and wonder if life will ever balance out. An elderly person hears it when the doctor's report carries more questions than answers. In each season of life, fear rises when certainty disappears, and it often convinces us that paralysis is safer than progress. Yet faith speaks with another voice, not denying the reality of uncertainty, but declaring that God is already in the place you fear to walk into. There is a reason the human brain clings to fear in the face of uncertainty. Neuroscientists say the amygdala, that small, almond-shaped part of your brain, is wired to protect you from threats by flooding you with signals of danger whenever you step into the unfamiliar. It was created to help ancient humans survive in a world filled with wild animals and unknown lands. But in modern times, it often misfires. It makes a teenager afraid of failing before even trying. It makes an entrepreneur hesitate to take the leap toward building a dream. It convinces a parent that one wrong decision will destroy their family's future. Fear thrives where knowledge ends, but that doesn't mean fear is the truth. Faith enters here, not as denial of danger, but as a higher awareness that the God who crafted galaxies is also crafting the details of your tomorrow. Think about how fear of the unknown holds back potential. In America, so many young people with extraordinary talent never chase their dream career because the path seems foggy and uncertain. They take the safer road, not because their hearts burn for it, but because fear whispers, "Stay here where you can control things." Adults settle for jobs that drain their souls because fear of unemployment feels heavier than the possibility of growth. Families stay trapped in cycles of debt because fear tells them risk is worse than stagnation. Yet when you study those who broke free, you see a common thread. Faith carried them into the fog, trusting that even without all the answers, God was in the unseen. Psychologists have discovered that faith literally reshapes the mind. Functional MRI scans show that prayer and trust activate the prefrontal cortex, calming the amygdala, lowering stress hormones, and allowing the brain to see opportunities instead of only threats. That is why someone who lives by faith can walk through circumstances that paralyze others and still hold peace in their chest. Fear says the unknown is chaos. Faith says the unknown is God's canvas. Fear shrinks life to what is predictable. Faith expands life to what is possible. Stories of fear and faith are written into history. Picture the moment when Rosa Parks decided to stay seated on that bus. Fear screamed that she could be arrested, beaten, or worse. Faith whispered that justice is worth the risk, and God is present in the unknown consequences. That small act, born in uncertainty, reshaped a nation. Think of a single mother raising children on her own. Every month, she looks at her paycheck, her bills, her exhaustion, and feels fear wrap around her. Yet faith reminds her that God multiplied bread and fish, and He can multiply strength, resources, and peace. That faith keeps her putting one foot forward, and the unknown becomes a place of miracles. There's also the silent fear of aging, a shadow that grows stronger as years pass. In a culture obsessed with youth, many fear what lies ahead in illness or loneliness. Yet faith reframes aging not as a decline, but as a passage into wisdom, into depth, into eternal promise. Faith says your body may grow weaker, but your spirit grows stronger, and the God who carried you through childhood and adulthood will not abandon you in old age. Fear looks at the grave and trembles. Faith looks at the grave and sees resurrection. One of the greatest tragedies is how fear convinces people to stop living before their life is done. A person with a passion for art buries it because they are afraid no one will value their work. A young man who feels called to speak never opens his mouth because fear says no one will listen. A woman with a dream to start a business locks it away because fear says failure will ruin her. Faith does not promise the path will be free from failure, but it promises that every step taken with God will be redeemed. Even in what looks like failure, God writes lessons, connections, and growth that prepare the soul for victories unseen. When faith enters the story, the unknown stops being an enemy and becomes a meeting place with God. Think of Abraham, called to leave everything familiar and walk into a land he did not know. Fear should have frozen him, but faith carried him, and through that unknown journey, a nation was born. In the same way, a teenager unsure of their future, a parent unsure of tomorrow's bills, an elder unsure of their health, can all take the next step not because they see everything clearly, but because they trust the one who sees beyond the horizon. It is easy to look back at life and realize that some of the best things happened in places you were once afraid to step into. The job you never thought you'd qualify for, the relationship you almost didn't pursue, the challenge you almost didn't accept. Fear told you to turn away, but faith gave you courage, and now those unknowns have become some of your greatest blessings. If you reflect deeply, you'll find that God was not just present in the safe places. He was loudest, strongest, most transformative in the unknown places where fear was greatest. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to walk forward despite fear, believing that God has already filled the unknown with His presence. The teenager applying to college can breathe deeply and say, "I don't know what's next, but God does." The parent working multiple jobs can whisper, "I don't see how this will work out, but I believe He holds my family." The elder facing health concerns can rest in, "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds me." That shift transforms life. It doesn't erase fear, but it silences fear's control. Fear thrives on the illusion that you are alone. It paints the unknown as an empty void. Faith breaks that illusion, declaring that you are never stepping into emptiness, but into a space already filled with divine purpose. Science supports this truth by showing how belief in God creates resilience, lowers anxiety, and builds hope. Psychology confirms that trust in something higher than yourself empowers you to endure uncertainty. History proves that every great breakthrough was birthed in faith's defiance of fear. Scripture proclaims over and over that God has not given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Fear asks, "What if everything falls apart?" Faith replies, "Even if it does, God will hold me together." Fear asks, "What if I am not enough?" Faith replies, "God's strength is made perfect in my weakness." Fear asks, "What if tomorrow is darker than today?" Faith replies, "God has already lit the path beyond the night." This is the essence of living with faith in the unknown. It is not about being reckless or ignoring wisdom. It is about walking forward when fear says stand still, trusting that God is not surprised by what you cannot see. It is about refusing to shrink your life down to only what you can predict and daring to live in the fullness of what God has prepared. It is about stepping into the mystery with courage, knowing that the Creator of the universe has already been there. So the next time fear rises when the unknown stares back at you, let faith speak louder. Let it remind you of every battle God has already carried you through. Every night He has already turned into morning. Every burden He has already lifted. The unknown will always exist, but so will God. And when those two collide, the unknown loses its power because the one who knows all holds you within His hands. Brokenness is one of the strangest teachers in life. It is not the lesson anyone asks for, and it rarely arrives at a convenient time. You don't plan to have your heart shattered by betrayal. You don't schedule a season of illness, or mark your calendar for financial collapse, or invite grief to come take a seat at your table. Brokenness arrives uninvited, unwanted, and often unbearable. And yet, if you look closely at the people who carry the deepest wisdom, who walk with the kind of strength that cannot be faked, you will often find they are people who have known the sharp edge of pain and the heavy silence of loss. Pain has a way of carving into the human soul, but in that carving it creates space for something divine. Think about the way light filters through stained glass. A solid piece of glass can be useful, but when it shatters and is put back together with intention, it becomes something extraordinary. Every crack becomes a path for light to shine through in colors that never existed before. Brokenness in human life works the same way. While you are in the middle of it, it feels only like loss. You see only the pieces scattered on the ground. But God is not intimidated by shattered glass. He is an artist who takes the fragments of a story and turns them into something so luminous that people who see it cannot help but pause in awe. C.S. Lewis once wrote that hardships often prepare ordinary people for extraordinary destinies. That line feels poetic until you are the one living the hardship. When you are the one sitting in the hospital room waiting for news that does not come. When you are the one standing at a graveside with questions that have no answers. When you are the one staring at a bank account that cannot stretch another day. In those moments, brokenness feels like the end. Yet again and again, life shows that these endings become the soil for beginnings that could not have grown otherwise. In American culture, where success is measured by speed, wealth, and productivity, brokenness feels like failure. A teenager who doesn't get into their dream college believes their future is ruined. An adult who loses a job believes they are worthless. An elderly person who cannot keep up with the pace of the world feels invisible. But that perspective is shallow. Brokenness is not failure, it is revelation. It reveals where you have been relying on yourself too much. It reveals where your foundation has been built on shifting sand instead of solid rock. It reveals how fragile life is, but also how resilient the human spirit can become when it leans on God. Psychologists explain that trauma and struggle can actually reshape the brain in ways that deepen empathy and resilience. People who have walked through suffering often become the ones who comfort others best because they understand pain not from a distance, but from the inside. There's a term for this: post-traumatic growth. Is the phenomenon where those who endure hardship emerge with a clearer sense of purpose, stronger relationships, and a deeper appreciation of life. Science, in its own way, affirms what faith has always known. Brokenness, surrender to God, becomes the birthplace of wisdom. Think of the stories that move you most. Rarely are they tales of uninterrupted comfort. The most powerful testimonies are born out of struggle. A man who battled addiction and now helps others break free. A woman who faced cancer and now speaks life into those still fighting. A soldier who lost friends in war and now fights for peace at home. Brokenness stripped them, but it also equipped them with a voice and a wisdom they could not have found in a life without struggle. It is easy to mistake brokenness for disqualification, but often it is preparation. A seed must break open before new life can grow. A clay pot must be shaped through pressure and heat before it becomes useful. A muscle grows stronger only after it has been torn. The process hurts, but the outcome is strength and beauty that could not have been created otherwise. God does not delight in watching His children suffer, but He does delight in taking what was meant for harm and reshaping it for good. Consider the young man who dreamed of playing professional sports, but an injury took that dream away. At first, it feels like his entire identity has been stolen. But as he recovers, he discovers a passion for coaching, for teaching, for mentoring young athletes. His injury redirected him to a purpose he never saw coming, and through it, he impacts more lives than he would have on his own. Or think of the woman whose business failed. The loss crushed her confidence, drained her savings, and left her feeling humiliated. But that season taught her humility, discipline, and resilience. Years later, she starts another venture, wiser this time, and it flourishes beyond her imagination. The wisdom she carries came not from her successes, but from her brokenness. The beauty of wisdom born from brokenness is that it is unshakable. You can read wisdom in books, but lived wisdom carries weight that words alone cannot. A teenager may hear that heartbreak is survivable, but only the adult who endured it and healed can speak those words with a voice that penetrates. A young professional may be told that losing a job is not the end, but only the person who has walked through unemployment and risen again can embody that truth. Wisdom born of brokenness is not abstract. It is flesh and bone. It is scars that testify. It is eyes that have seen darkness yet still shine with light. Spiritually, brokenness draws us closer to God because it strips away illusions. When life is smooth, it is easy to believe you are in control, that your plans are enough. When everything shatters, you realize control was always an illusion. In that moment, when you cry out, when you surrender, when you admit you cannot fix yourself, God steps in not as a distant observer, but as a present healer. And in that exchange, wisdom is born. You learn that strength is not in self-sufficiency, but in reliance on Him. You learn that hope is not fragile optimism, but anchored trust in God's promises. You learn that love is not cheap words, but sacrificial action that sustains you in the valley. The truth is, the world often celebrates polished success, but heaven celebrates redemptive stories. God is less interested in showing off your perfection than He is in revealing His glory through your weakness. The Apostle Paul spoke of a thorn in his flesh, something that broke him again and again. He pleaded with God to take it away, but God responded, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That is the paradox of brokenness. What feels like a curse can become the very place where God's power is revealed most clearly. Wisdom in brokenness also teaches us compassion. People who have never suffered often lack the ability to sit with others in their pain. They rush to fix, to advise, to move on. But those who have been broken know the value of presence. They know how to sit in silence, how to listen, how to hold space for another's tears without judgment. They carry wisdom not just in words, but in how they love. Their brokenness has softened them, expanded their heart, and made them safe havens for others who are hurting. Think of how many lives have been touched because someone dared to share their brokenness instead of hiding it. A man stands on a stage and admits he once tried to take his own life, and in the crowd, a teenager hears those words and chooses to hold on one more day. A woman writes about losing everything in a divorce, and a reader finds the courage to rebuild her own life. Brokenness, when offered honestly, becomes a gift to the world. It says, "I have been where you are. I survived. You can too." That kind of wisdom cannot be faked. It carries authority because it was paid for with tears. The path of brokenness also humbles us. It reminds us that we are not invincible, that our lives are fragile, that control is an illusion. And yet in that humility comes freedom. You no longer have to pretend you have it all together. You no longer have to live under the pressure of perfection. You can walk honestly, knowing that your cracks do not disqualify you, but reveal where God's light shines through. The Japanese art of kintsugi repairs broken pottery with gold, making the cracks the most beautiful part of the piece. In the same way, God does not hide your brokenness. He redeems it, and the very places you were shattered become the testimony of His grace. Wisdom born of brokenness is not the kind that comes quickly. It takes time, like a wound healing into a scar. But once it forms, it is indestructible. It allows you to walk into the unknown with courage, to face new pain with perspective, to guide others with gentleness. And most importantly, it keeps you anchored in the truth that life's worth is not measured by how little you break, but by how beautifully you rise again. So when brokenness comes, and it will in different ways, in different seasons, do not despise it. Do not believe the lie that it means you are finished. Do not let fear convince you that all is lost. Instead, lean into the possibility that something greater is being formed in you. Trust that God is not discarding you, but shaping you. Believe that the wisdom you will carry on the other side will be a gift not just for you, but for everyone your life touches. Brokenness hurts, but brokenness also teaches. And when it is surrendered, it becomes the soil where the deepest wisdom grows, the kind that can carry you through storms and help others survive theirs. There comes a point in every human life when strength runs out. You fight as long as you can, you hold on as tightly as possible. You pour in all the effort, all the willpower, all the energy, and yet the wall in front of you refuses to move. That is the space where frustration is born, where the voice inside whispers that you are not enough, that the task is too great, that the story is over. And it is in that exact moment that a deeper truth comes alive, a truth many people forget until life brings them to their knees. There is a God who specializes in finishing what human hands cannot. Life in America often teaches the opposite. It tells you that if you just grind harder, wake up earlier, hustle longer, you can achieve anything. And for a while, that philosophy works. Students pull all-nighters to pass exams. Workers put in endless hours to climb the corporate ladder. Parents sacrifice everything to give their children a future. Athletes push their bodies to the edge in pursuit of victory. But no matter how strong, disciplined, or determined you are, life will confront you with problems you cannot solve by effort alone. A diagnosis that no medicine seems to cure. A relationship that no conversation can repair. A grief that no distraction can erase. A dream that slips through your fingers despite your best planning. These are the moments that reveal the limits of human will and the vastness of divine power. Psychology tells us that the human mind struggles with unfinished tasks. There's even a name for it, the Zeigarnik effect. It explains why unfinished work lingers in your thoughts, why unresolved pain keeps resurfacing, why unfulfilled dreams haunt you in the quiet hours of the night. We long for completion. We crave closure. Yet so much of life refuses to offer it on our terms. That is why surrender becomes so powerful. Faith does not deny the ache of incompletion. It transfers the responsibility of finishing from our fragile hands into the hands of a God who never leaves work undone. Think of a relay race. The runner gives everything, straining every muscle, heart pounding, lungs burning, until they cannot take another step. At that moment, the baton is passed and another takes over. Life mirrors that race. You give all you have, but when you can go no further, God steps in as the finisher. What looks like your breaking point becomes His starting point. What looks like your last step becomes His first move. There are countless stories of people who met their limit only to discover God's limitless power. A mother spends years praying for her child who has drifted into addiction. She tries every rehab program, every tough conversation, every ounce of support, and nothing changes. She reaches the end of her strength, exhausted and heartbroken. Then, in a moment she cannot explain, her child begins to change, not because of her power, but because God began to move in ways unseen. Or think of a man who invests years into building a career, only to have it collapse in an instant due to circumstances outside his control. For months, he tries to rebuild on his own and fails. When he lets go of control, and places his future in God's hands, unexpected doors begin to open, doors he never could have forced himself. History, too, carries the echo of this truth. The great leaders who reshaped nations often admitted that their strength was not enough. Abraham Lincoln, in the heat of the Civil War, confessed that he had been driven to his knees in prayer because he had no other place to go. Martin Luther King Jr. knew the cause he carried was too heavy for one man, but faith in God gave him courage to keep walking. They reached the end of human ability, but they discovered that God can take what feels incomplete and carry it to fulfillment. In the quiet corners of psychology, you also find this alignment. Studies show that people who believe in a higher power often experience greater resilience, faster recovery from trauma, and deeper peace in the face of uncertainty. Faith does not erase the challenge, but it gives meaning to the struggle and hope beyond the limits of human strength. The human spirit alone can bend and break. The human spirit, joined with divine help, can endure and overcome. This truth is deeply personal as well. Every person has a story of something unfinished, some dream, some wound, some unanswered prayer. For a teenager, it may be the dream of proving themselves in a world that feels impossible to please. For an adult, it may be the struggle of carrying responsibilities that feel endless, a career that demands more than it gives, or a family battle that drains every ounce of strength. For an elderly soul, it may be the weight of years filled with regrets, or the fear of not leaving behind enough for loved ones. Each heart knows the sting of incompletion, and yet the story of faith is that God Himself promises to finish what He begins. The Apostle Paul wrote with conviction, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion." That means your life is not a half-written sentence. Your story is not left dangling in uncertainty. God Himself is the author and the finisher, and He does not abandon His work midway. There is something breathtaking about the way God completes what we cannot. Sometimes it looks miraculous, like a sudden healing or an impossible opportunity. Sometimes it looks subtle, like strength to endure another day or peace in the middle of unanswered questions. Either way, it is God declaring, "You are not alone in this story. I am writing with you." That changes everything because it frees you from the crushing burden of having to fix everything yourself. It releases you from the illusion that your worth is tied to how perfectly you complete your own plans. It reminds you that surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. Brokenness meets its answer here too. All the pieces of your life that you think will never fit together, all the chapters you think will never make sense, all the dreams that seem forever delayed, these are the very things God collects and finishes in His time. The masterpiece of your life may look incomplete to you right now, but to Him, every unfinished detail is part of a larger story. It is like standing too close to a painting and seeing only random strokes of color. Step back, and suddenly you see the picture. God holds that perspective when you cannot. Even science gives us a glimpse of this mystery. Research in positive psychology shows that hope itself sustains people through long trials. When you believe that the story is not over, when you hold on to the possibility of completion beyond your strength, you find energy to keep moving forward. Faith amplifies this hope because it does not just rely on chance, it relies on the certainty of God's promises. You are not hoping blindly, you are trusting in one who has proven faithful across generations. It is a liberating thought that you are not required to finish everything alone. You are called to be faithful, to do your part, to give your best, but not to carry the unbearable weight of outcomes that only God can orchestrate. Students often feel crushed under the pressure to secure their entire future with one decision. Workers feel crushed under the weight of providing for a family in uncertain times. Leaders feel crushed under the burden of solving problems larger than themselves. But freedom enters when you realize your role is not to finish every battle, but to place the baton in God's hands and trust Him to run farther than you ever could. Fear loses power when you believe God is the finisher. Fear says, "What if I fail?" Faith answers, "God will redeem even my failures." Fear says, "What if I can't carry this to the end?" Faith answers, "God already holds the end." Fear says, "What if everything falls apart?" Faith answers, "God can build from the ruins." This shift transforms your outlook. You no longer live with the constant dread of incompletion because you know that even if your efforts stop short, God's hand will continue. There is also a quiet joy that comes when you allow God to finish what you cannot. It releases you from the prison of perfectionism. You do not need to perform flawlessly to be worthy. You do not need to control every variable to succeed. You are free to rest, to breathe, to trust, knowing that the one who created the universe is not going to leave your life unfinished. That joy does not mean life becomes easy. It means you walk through challenges with an anchor, a steady assurance that no matter how impossible things look, the finisher is already at work. Think of the countless lives changed because people let God finish what they could not. A man battling depression reaches his breaking point, and just when he thinks there is no way out, God places someone in his life to speak hope. A family crushed by financial ruin finds unexpected provision through opportunities they never anticipated. A person facing the grief of losing someone dear discovers a comfort that is deeper than explanation, a peace that cannot be manufactured, a strength that feels borrowed from heaven itself. These are the fingerprints of a God who finishes. So if you find yourself standing at the edge of your strength, if you feel the weight of unfinished business, if you are haunted by the tasks, dreams, and prayers that feel unresolved, know this: you are not abandoned in that space. You are not failing simply because you cannot carry everything alone. You are exactly where God's power meets your weakness. You are exactly where His finishing hand can take over. And when He finishes, it will not just be enough. It will be more beautiful, more purposeful, and more complete than you could have ever written yourself.